Now, the civil war in Syria is in its 4th year, and it's having a profound impact on a generation of young people. 7 million children need urgent humanitarian aid, while 1.5 million youngsters are living as refugees in neighbouring countries. UNICEF Next Generation was set up to meet the medical and education needs of Syria's children. And I'm delighted to say that Layla Yarjani, the group's founding chairman, now joins me in the studio. Very good morning to you. I mean, those figures are very disturbing, but given that this conflict is ongoing, you get the sense that perhaps they don't reflect the true picture, that maybe the numbers are far greater than what's officially recorded.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I often get the question, you know, what are the latest numbers? And it's very difficult to say what those numbers are because they're changing every day. And there isn't really any accurate reporting coming out of the region. So some of those numbers are probably not what the accurate figures actually are. So I think the problem is far worse than we know here.
Which probably makes it very difficult for your group in terms of fulfilling its objectives and reaching out to these kids.
Yes, absolutely. So we're fortunate because we work so closely with the UNICEF team, and we rely on UNICEF to disperse funds and select where within the region the money is going. So I think that enables us to be a bit more kind of successful and proactive. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, to describe the relationship between your group and UNICEF, how did you get together?
So Next Generation was started actually in New York 4 or 5 years ago. And when I moved here from New York City, I thought there was a bit of a gap. So I actually proposed to UNICEF that we should start something here in London for young people to be able to actually partner closely with UNICEF, to fundraise, to educate ourselves and other young professionals, and also be advocates for what's happening in the region. So the proposal that kind of I put forth was worked through with UNICEF from the early days. So we have UNICEF supporting us on the selection of kind of the project we've chosen Syria because it's so underfunded, as well as working closely with us across many different facets within the objectives that we're trying to deliver.
Why do you think that Syria is so underfunded? Because it's always in the news, tragically, for all the wrong reasons. We've seen quite a few appeals, etc. So one would assume that with the response, the public response coming through, that that cash line, that aid, would be a constant. But it's rather worrying that not enough seems to be getting through to where it's needed the most.
Yeah, so it's funny you say that. We actually chose Syria as our kind of cause because it's so underfunded. And I think, and this is, you know, personal opinion, but I think the reason why it's so underfunded is because there's just been so much happening in the world over the last 4 or 5 years. And I think some of the other kind of crises have had a lot more media coverage and have had a lot more social media coverage. So I think what's happened with Syria is perhaps it just hasn't had the coverage it deserves because of the other things that are going on that might seem a little bit more brutal than what's happening in Syria.
Not so much brutal, but the truth.
Well, exactly, exactly, yeah.
But I mean, clearly what you do is, in working with UNICEF, you target the money that you raise to go to specific areas, shall we say. How do you prioritise?
So, again, we leave that with UNICEF because our objective is mainly to help people in London, young professionals, understand what is happening in the region and also to fundraise for the region more broadly. So to avoid any political discussions and to avoid, you know, people providing opinions on things they're not, you know, kind of able to provide opinions on or should be providing opinions on, we just earmark the funds that we raise for Syria and the region. So any refugees, any kind of children in the region is where our funds are targeted.
But it must be quite a challenge as well getting people to come on board, because at the end of the day everybody has an opinion about Syria, and that in itself may actually shape their contribution, what they're going to give.
Absolutely. So what we focus on in terms of our educational events to bring people on board is showing kind of both sides, or I would say the 10 sides, because, you know, as you're aware, there are many rebel groups, many different forces in the region. So we try to take a very educational approach to any of our events, and candidly, I try to stay as unpolitical on the subject as I can, because it really, for me, is not about the politics of the situation. I think there are much bigger powers at play there. For me, it's really about the children in the region who don't have any way of helping themselves.
And I mean, it is a huge task, because even if you're able to cater for people materially and medically, we shouldn't forget the psychology as well, because these children have been exposed to the most brutal violence.
Absolutely. So I think one thing that our team, it's actually a challenge for us, is actually how can we help those children on the ground, person to person, and it's just not very possible to do so. I think one thing that we're talking about now is how do we help refugees who've been brought to the UK or who've been given access to the UK, which, as you're aware, the numbers are few. And so I think it's very difficult to have that level of impact from London.
I suppose the other thing which emerges as well is that whilst it's very good to do the fundraising and to work with organisations like UNICEF, it's important to make sure that people don't become too dependent on aid, because ultimately they have to stand on their own 2 feet. They need to recover their independence.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I get this question regularly, but for me it's very difficult to justify that argument when you're talking about children. I think a 5-year-old is not really able to stand on his 2 feet and shouldn't have to.
Certainly the parents.
Yeah, certainly the parents, but I think from the stories that we're getting back from the field, it seems very much that people are doing whatever they can to get by, and I think for them not to rely on aid, there's a much bigger problem that needs to be solved first.
And in terms of those stories you're hearing from the field, obviously UNICEF would report back and tell you what is happening. What are they saying? Can you sense that you are making a difference, however small that difference may be?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, especially with the winter months, have had a very strong push for fundraising because it's, as you're aware, brutal right now in terms of the weather. And so, yes, there is absolutely. We feel that we are making an impact, and I think that we will continue to support this cause as long as it needs funding.
Do you think that you'll ever get the chance to go to Syria when things calm down, when it's safe enough to go there? Is that something you aspire towards?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm Iranian originally, and for me, being able to go work in the field that is my kind of home, that is my region, it would be absolutely a pleasure. Yeah.
So you'd actually like to work in Syria once it's safer, because obviously the reconstruction is going to take years, given that this war has raged now for 4 years and may go on for another 4, for all we know.
Yeah, absolutely. Once it's safer, and also if there is a role where I can really add value. I'd hate to go out to the field just to fulfill some kind of personal desire. I think if there's something that really calls me to the region, then absolutely, yeah, it'd be a great opportunity.
I'm sure you'll be very effective as well. Layla Yarjani, thank you so much for coming in and telling us about UNICEF Next Generation.
Thank you for having me.